Jaxon Keller knew he was late the second his sleek black Maserati turned onto the narrow street behind the high school stadium, the distant roar of the crowd echoing through the night air. "Perfect," he muttered, tugging at his watch cuff. "I missed the kickoff, and now I'll probably have to walk in like some lost parent." He hated being late. But this wasn't just any game, it was the state semifinals, and his little brother, Blake, was the starting quarterback. Jaxon had flown in from Chicago that morning, cutting meetings short, ignoring phone calls from investors, and pushing back a dinner with a hedge fund exec just to watch Blake play. He hadn't been back in his hometown in over 6 years, not since his parents passed, and he buried himself into building his software company from scratch. He parked in a gravel lot behind the bleachers, far from the VIP section he was supposed to enter through. "Guess I'm going in the old-fashioned way," he muttered, stepping out into the crisp autumn air. The ticket booth was still open, lit by a single flickering floodlight. He jogged toward it, buttoning his coat against the cold. But as he reached the booth, he froze. She was behind the glass window, wearing a faded school hoodie, her dark curls tumbling down her shoulders, a pencil tucked behind one ear. Her eyes were focused on the cash box, lips pursed in concentration. "Hi," he said before he could think. She looked up and her eyes met his warm brown, sharp, curious. "Game started 10 minutes ago," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're late," he smiled. "Yeah, I figured. Can I still get in?" She tilted her head. "Depends." "You got $10. He reached into his coat, pulled out his wallet, and handed her a crisp 100, her eyebrows lifted. "You expecting change?" "Not really," he said. "Consider it a donation to the school." She studied him for a second, then tore a ticket and slid it under the glass. "You're not from around here, are you?" Jaxon laughed. "I used to be, a long time ago." She handed him the stub. "You here for someone, my brother, quarterback?" "Oh, Blake Keller." She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Didn't know he had a brother." "We haven't exactly been close," Jaxon admitted. "I've been in Chicago." She nodded, clearly not impressed. "Well, better late than never." He glanced at her name tag, half tucked under her jacket. "Vienna," he said aloud. "That's a beautiful name." She gave a small smile. "Thanks, I didn't pick it." Before he could say more, a loud cheer erupted from the crowd. "You should get in there," she said, nodding toward the entrance. "Right." He hesitated. "Will you be here after the game?" She raised an eyebrow. "Why? Maybe I'll owe you change after all." Vienna let out a real laugh this time, and it hit him like a punch, warm, unexpected, and way too good. "I'll be here," she said. "But only because I'm stuck on cleanup duty. Then I guess I'll see you after." He walked into the stadium, but even with the crowd screaming and the lights blazing, he couldn't stop thinking about the girl in the ticket booth. After the game, which Blake's team won in a nail-biting finish, Jaxon circled back to the emptying lot. The crowd had mostly dispersed, and the ticket booth light was still on. Vienna was stacking papers and locking the cash drawer. "You came back," she said when she saw him. "I said I would." She stepped out of the booth, pulling her jacket tighter. "You really gave me $100 for a $10 ticket." "I'm bad with small bills," he said. "You're bad at being subtle." Jaxon grinned. "I'm Jaxon, by the way, I figured." "Blake yelled your name when he ran off the field," he chuckled. "He did?" "Yeah," said my brother actually showed up, like it was a miracle. Jaxon rubbed the back of his neck. "I haven't been great at the whole family thing." "Well, you showed up tonight." "That counts." They stood in the chilly night air, the stadium lights dimming behind them. "Let me take you out to dinner," he said suddenly. Vienna looked up. "What, dinner? You were stuck in that booth all night. You probably haven't eaten." She paused. "You don't even know me." "I'd like to." She studied him like she was trying to figure out what kind of man he really was. "You from the city, right?" "Yeah, Chicago. You don't look like you belong here anymore." "I don't," he said honestly. "But right now, I don't want to be anywhere else." Vienna looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small laugh. "You're lucky I'm starving." He opened the passenger door of his car for her, and she froze. "Is this your car?" "Yeah, this is a Maserati." "I know." She slid into the seat, looking around. Okay, now I really need to ask, what do you do for a living? Jaxon shut the door, walked around, and climbed into the driver's seat. I run a tech company, started it 8 years ago. Huh. That explains the $100 ticket. He started the engine, pulling out of the lot. I've got a place in the city, offices downtown, but I grew up here, just haven't been back in a while. She nodded slowly. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Some cocky jerk who thinks he's better than everyone because he drives a car that costs more than my student loans. He glanced at her. You're not entirely wrong. That made her laugh again. They ended up at a small diner on the edge of town. The kind with red vinyl booths and pie that had been made 2 days ago. Vienna ordered a cheeseburger. Jaxon got pancakes. They talked for hours about high school, about Blake, about her job at the school office, and her dream of going to grad school for counseling. She was smart, quick, and real in a way that disarmed him completely. He hadn't meant to come back and find anything other than a football game, but Vienna, she was different, and the strangest part was, he didn't want the night to end. Vienna's phone buzzed loudly against the chipped formica table. She glanced at it, hesitated, and flipped it over without answering. Everything okay? Jaxon asked, setting down his coffee. She nodded, picking at the corner of her napkin. Just my roommate wondering where I am. She's got this theory that if I'm gone longer than 3 hours, I've either been kidnapped or offered a modeling contract. He leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. And which one do you think this is? She tilted her head. Neither. But you are kind of a wild card. That's the first time I've been called that, he said, eyes narrowing with amusement. Vienna took another bite of her cheeseburger, chewing thoughtfully before speaking. You don't carry yourself like someone who's used to being underestimated. I'm not, he said simply. So why'd you disappear from here for so long? Jaxon rested his forearms on the table. I left because I had to. I stayed gone because it was easier than dealing with the reasons I left. She didn't press him, and he appreciated it. Instead, she reached for the ketchup bottle and said, You ever wonder what people think when they hear your name back here? Not until tonight. Well, now you're the guy who showed up in a car that made Coach Whitman forget he was mid-sentence. He laughed quietly. I didn't mean to make an entrance. You definitely didn't sneak in. He paused, studying her. You're not what I expected either. Vienna raised her brows. What did you expect? Someone who'd be bored out of her mind stuck behind a ticket booth. But you looked like you belonged there. She set down her fork, her tone shifting. I work 2 jobs. The school pays me for office admin and I help out with events for extra hours. It's not glamorous, but it pays what it needs to. He didn't flinch. That's not what I meant. You looked like you cared, like it mattered that people got in, that the night went smoothly, she shrugged. It does matter. My dad used to coach there before he got sick. That field means something. There was a silence between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with things unsaid. Jaxon broke it. What happened to him? Cancer. Took him last year. She took a sip of her water. I stayed in town to help my mom. I figured I'd do grad school later. He didn't offer sympathy. Instead, he said, You're going to go, though. Vienna met his gaze. You sound certain? I am. You talk like someone who's already on their way. You just haven't packed yet. Her lips pressed together, thoughtful. You're not what I pictured either, Jaxon. Let me guess. You thought I'd be arrogant, shallow, maybe a little entitled. I thought you'd be gone by now. He leaned forward. Would it disappoint you if I wasn't? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, How long are you staying? I don't know yet. People don't usually not know things like that. I used to know everything down to the hour. Now I'm trying something new. Vienna crossed her arms. And what exactly are you trying? He leaned back slowly. Not rushing out the door the second something feels unfamiliar. She glanced toward the window. The parking lot outside was empty now except for his car and a single flickering lamp post. I should head home, she said softly. Jaxon nodded once, pulling out his card and slipping it across the table. In case you ever want pancakes at midnight again. She looked at it but didn't pick it up. You give that to everyone you meet at high school football games? Only the ones who make me forget I'm supposed to be somewhere else. Her eyes lingered on his for a beat longer than necessary before she stood. He followed her out, unlocking the car. The ride back was quiet but not awkward. The kind of silence where too much was being processed to make room for small talk. When they pulled up in front of a modest duplex, she unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move to open the door. "You're not just visiting your brother, are you?" He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because you looked surprised you cared this much about being back." Jaxon didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Can I see you again?" Vienna opened the door, stepping out into the cold. "Give me a reason to." Then she shut it gently and disappeared inside. Jaxon stayed parked for a moment, watching the porch light flicker on behind her. He wasn't sure what had shifted in him tonight, but something had. And it wasn't just the girl with the sharp eyes and careful laugh. It was the feeling that, for the first time in years, he didn't want to be anywhere else. Jaxon stood in the center of the dimly lit high school gym, the echo of bouncing basketballs and squeaking sneakers filling the space. Blake was somewhere across the court, laughing with teammates as they ran through drills. Jaxon wasn't watching the scrimmage, he was watching the clock. Vienna had agreed to meet him here after school, and the second hand seemed to drag out every minute. He hadn't expected the wait to make him this restless. The side door opened, and Vienna stepped in, her denim jacket clutched around her, hair gathered into a loose bun that made her look casually elegant. She didn't wave. She just walked up to him like she belonged in his world, like she wasn't the reason everything in him felt abruptly, uncomfortably awake. "You called in a favor with Coach Whitman?" she asked, glancing around the gym. "He owed me," Jaxon replied. "I donated a new scoreboard." Vienna raised an eyebrow. "You bribed your way into a basketball practice?" "I invited you here," he corrected. "The gym just happened to be available." "Right," she said, letting her voice stretch with amusement. "And I just happened to be curious enough to show up." "Are you?" She looked up at him. "Curious?" "Yes." He didn't hide the way that word settled into him. "Good. Because I've been thinking about you since the diner. You don't waste time, do you?" "I don't have much of it to waste." Vienna leaned against the bleacher railing. "So what is this?" "You're in town for a few days, looking for a distraction. If I wanted a distraction, I wouldn't have asked you here." She looked at the court, watching Blake sink a three-pointer. "You're really staying longer than you planned." "I extended my trip." "For your brother, for myself," he said. Vienna folded her arms. "You're not the type who just takes a break. There's something else going on." He hesitated, then nodded. "My board's trying to push for an acquisition. They want to sell the company. Isn't that good? It's profitable," he said. "But not why I built it." She watched him carefully. "So you ran from Chicago instead of dealing with it." "I didn't run," he said. "I just picked somewhere else to stand for a while." Vienna gave a quiet laugh. "That somewhere else was a high school football game. Apparently, I have excellent timing." She glanced at the court again. "You know, I used to want to leave this town so badly I'd count streetlights like they were prison bars. What changed? My dad got sick. Then everything that mattered was here." Jaxon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And now I'm not sure who I am if I don't have something to take care of. You ever think maybe it's time someone took care of you for a change?" Vienna blinked. "Is that what this is?" "You trying to take care of me?" "No," he said. "This is me not pretending I'm unaffected." They stood in silence, the shouts from the court fading beneath the weight of what hung between them. Finally, Vienna said, "You're intense." He tilted his head. "Does that bother you?" "No," she said. "But it's dangerous, because I've spent years building something steady. You're a storm in a tailored coat." Jaxon laughed, low and surprised. "That's the most accurate thing anyone's said to me in years." Vienna started toward the bleachers. "So what do you want from me, Jaxon?" He followed her. "Time, honesty, a second chance at something real. You think this is real?" "I know it is." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "You say that like you've had everything else." "I have," he admitted. "And none of it ever felt like this." For a moment she didn't respond, then she walked slowly toward the court's edge and sat. "I'll give you one night, one actual date. You get 3 hours, that's it." He didn't hesitate. "Tonight?" "Yes, no rules, just one," she said. "You don't get to pretend you have nothing to lose," he nodded once. "Deal." Vienna stood and headed for the exit. At the door she paused. "And Jaxon," he turned, "don't try to impress me with expensive things. If you want to impress me, show me something real." She disappeared down the hallway before he could respond, leaving him staring at a door that had never felt more like a challenge. That night, just after 6, Jaxon pulled into the gravel path behind the old train depot. It was abandoned now, tucked behind a row of overgrown hedges and rusting freight cars. But the sunset spilled across the brick in brilliant gold, and the breeze carried the scent of late autumn leaves. He stepped out and opened the passenger door of his SUV just as Vienna approached. She wore a slate blue coat, her hair down, and a skeptical look in her eyes. "This is your idea of a date. You said something real," he reminded her. "This place is where my dad used to take me when I needed to think. It's the least polished thing I've got." Vienna climbed in. "You're lucky I like ghosts and steel." Inside, he'd set up a small table, just 2 chairs and a thick wool blanket laid across the top. A lantern flickered between them, and a thermos of coffee sat beside a bag of pastries from the bakery he'd found that morning. She looked around the crumbling space. "You really went for the whole earnest thing, didn't you? It's not an act." Vienna poured coffee into 2 mugs. "Then tell me something you've never told anyone." He didn't hesitate. "I used to fake asthma attacks to get out of school presentations." She laughed, nearly spilling the coffee. "Seriously?" "I'd cough until the teacher called the nurse. I was terrified of public speaking." Vienna shook her head. "Now you probably give speeches to entire boards." "Now I pay someone to do it." She leaned forward. "Your turn. Ask me something." "What's something you've never admitted out loud?" Vienna hesitated, then said quietly, "Sometimes I wonder if I stayed because it was noble. Or because I was scared to leave." Jaxon didn't answer right away. He just reached across the table and slid his hand over hers. "You're not scared now?" "No," she said softly, "but I don't know what comes next." He tightened his grip slightly, voice steady. "Maybe we figure it out together." And for the first time since she walked into that diner, Vienna didn't challenge him. She just held his hand and watched the lantern flame flicker between them as something new, something fragile and terrifying and unmistakably real began to take root. The gala was louder than Jaxon remembered these events being. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the high ceilings of the downtown hotel's grand ballroom, casting golden light over rows of tuxedos and floor-length gowns. Champagne flutes clinked and orchestral music swelled from the string quartet near the stage. It was the kind of evening that usually bored him to death. Tonight, it felt like a battlefield. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gift from a venture partner in Zurich, and scanned the crowd. He'd hosted this annual charity event for 5 years now, always as a formality, always with a polite smile and a well-rehearsed speech. But this year was different, because tonight Vienna was coming, and this time he wasn't hiding anything. "Mr. Keller," a sleek woman in black approached him, clutching a tablet. "Your speech is in 17 minutes. The mayor just arrived and the press wants a photo with you before the silent auction closes." "Tell them I'll be there in 5, Jaxon said without looking away from the entrance. The woman hesitated. "Should I hold the photo until your guest arrives?" He gave a single nod and she disappeared into the crowd. Outside the glass doors, a town car pulled to the curb. Jaxon felt his chest tighten. Vienna stepped out slowly, holding the hand of the driver as she descended. Her dress was deep navy, cut in clean lines, elegant and unassuming, exactly like her. Her hair was swept up in a loose twist, and she wore no jewelry except a silver bracelet around her wrist. He walked toward her, catching the wide-eyed looks from donors and developers as they realized this woman wasn't another heiress or socialite. "You look like you don't want to be here," Vienna said as he reached her. "I don't," he admitted. But I needed you to see this part of my life." She glanced behind him at the ballroom. "And you think bringing me to a room full of billionaires and political donors is the way to do that? I think it's the only way to tell you the truth without words." She exhaled slowly. "This isn't my world, Jaxon." "I know," he said, "but it's mine and I want you in it." They entered together and the room stilled for a moment. People turned subtly, recognizing Jaxon, then Vienna, then trying to put the pieces together. He could see the silent calculations behind their eyes. She didn't flinch. He led her to their table near the front, where his name was engraved in gold on the place cards. She sat beside him without hesitation, even when a hedge fund CEO leaned over to ask where she was from. "I work at a high school," she said calmly. "In a town that doesn't have streetlights after midnight." The man blinked. "How quaint," Jaxon cut in smoothly. "She's the best person I've met in 10 years. The man turned away. Vienna leaned closer. "You didn't have to defend me." "I didn't," he said. "I defended the truth." Then the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage and a woman in a red gown announced Jaxon's name. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the microphone. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Tonight I was supposed to give a talk about innovation and philanthropy, but I'm changing the agenda." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I've spent the last decade obsessed with building," he continued. "Companies, wealth, reach, but none of it ever made me feel present. Until I came home." He paused, letting the words settle. "I came back for a football game. I left with something I didn't know I'd been missing. Someone." He looked down at Vienna. "I don't care what the papers say tomorrow. I don't care which investors pull out. I care that she's here." The crowd fell silent. He stepped away from the mic and walked down from the stage. Vienna stood slowly as he approached. "You didn't have to say that," she whispered. "I did," he said. "Because I spent years thinking I'd built everything, but I hadn't built a life." "Not really." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "I don't want to visit you between meetings. I don't want to schedule you like a board call." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to know that I'm done running companies if it means I lose you. I want mornings in your kitchen and nights that don't end with goodbyes. I want the life I never thought I deserved." Vienna's voice was quiet. "You're not the man I met at that ticket booth." "I know," he said. "Because you changed me." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. She froze. "I didn't plan this," he said. "I didn't have a speech or some grand plan, but I've never been more certain about anything in my life." He opened it. Inside was a simple diamond ring, elegant and unflashy, exactly like her. "You said you needed a reason to believe me. This is it." Vienna didn't speak for a long moment. Then she took the box from his hand, closed it, and tucked it into her purse. "I'm not saying yes yet," she said, her voice steady. "I wouldn't believe you if you did." She stepped closer. "But I'm not saying no." Jaxon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Come home with me tonight," she said. "Not to the city. To where it started." He nodded, and they walked out together, leaving behind the ballroom and the cameras and the murmuring crowd. They drove in silence, Vienna barefoot in the passenger seat, her heels discarded on the floor. The town was quiet, the streets empty as they pulled up to the edge of the field where the stadium lights were already off. They walked to the 50-yard line, the same place where Blake had thrown his winning pass that night. "Why here?" Jaxon asked. "Because this is where you found me," she said. "And I want to be sure you're not just chasing a moment." "I'm not." Vienna reached into her purse and held out the ring box. "If I say yes, it's not because of the ring or your company or your car, it's because I believe you'll show up." "Every time." "I will," he said. "Later not," she smiled. And this time she opened the box, slid the ring onto her finger and leaned in until her forehead met his. "No more stadiums," she whispered. "No more cities," he said, "just them, real, rooted, and finally home." Vienna didn't cry when she slipped the ring on her finger, but she did stare at it for a long time the next morning while sitting on the creaky porch swing in front of her mother's house. The wind was brisk, rustling the trees lining the narrow street. The sun had barely risen, but she hadn't slept. Not from nerves, from something else, from knowing, deep in her chest, that the life she thought she'd be rebuilding alone was now tied to someone who didn't just show up, but stayed. Jaxon stepped outside, coffee mug in one hand, his other adjusting the sleeves of the worn hoodie he'd borrowed from her brother's closet. He looked nothing like a billionaire right now, and she loved him more for it. "You keep staring at it like it might vanish," he said, settling beside her. "I was wondering if I should wear it to school today," Vienna said thoughtfully. "Might cause a riot among the office staff. They're convinced I'm secretly dating the new janitor. I could show up and shatter their theories." She nudged his knee with hers. "You'd give Principal Torres a heart attack. You think he'd notice? Your car costs more than the school's annual budget. He'd notice." Jaxon took a long sip from his mug before setting it aside. "We should talk about the city." Vienna turned to him, alert. "What about it?" "I'm not going back," she blinked. "Jaxon, your company is being turned over to someone else. I've been grooming my COO for months. She's ready. And I realized I don't want to run it anymore, not like that." He reached for her hand. "I signed the transition papers last night after you fell asleep." Vienna's breath caught. "You didn't tell me." "I wanted to be sure I was doing it for the right reasons. And I am. I'm not choosing you instead of my career. I'm choosing the version of myself I am with you," she whispered. "You really let it go." "There's nothing left in that world for me. I want something rooted. I want a house that doesn't echo, dinners that aren't catered, and mornings where I'm not checking stock tickers before I brush my teeth." Vienna turned her face toward the wind. "I never asked for this, I know, but we're building something new. Together." She stood and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I need to tell my mom." "I already did." Vienna turned sharply. "You what?" She was up when I went to get coffee. I asked her for permission. Vienna stared. "That's not funny." "I wasn't joking," she cried. "Then made me eat a cinnamon roll I didn't want." A laugh broke from her lips before she could stop it. "You're unbelievable. You keep saying that," Jaxon said, rising to meet her, "but you still said yes." They left the porch together, hand in hand. The town wasn't awake yet, but it didn't matter. Her world had already changed. 3 weeks later, the wedding was small. Just family, a few friends, and Vienna's co-workers who kept whispering about how she used to take the bus, and now had a fiancé who brought croissants from Paris when she had a bad day. They married in the arboretum behind the community library, beneath a canopy of old maple trees that were just beginning to bloom. Vienna wore a pale ivory dress with lace sleeves and no veil. Her bouquet was made of wildflowers gathered from the same hillside where Jaxon first kissed her under the stars. There was no orchestra, no fireworks, just a string of paper lanterns, a lot of laughter, and the kind of warmth that made everyone forget the chill in the spring air. Blake gave the toast. "To my brother," he said, raising his glass. "Who vanished for years, then came back and somehow convinced the best woman in town to marry him. I don't know how he did it, but I'm glad he did. Because now I get to keep them both." Vienna's mother danced with Jaxon under the lanterns. She whispered something in his ear that made him nod, eyes damp. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the cake had been demolished by a swarm of nieces and nephews, Vienna stood barefoot in the grass, her dress hem damp with dew, and looked up at her husband. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice low. "Wherever you want," he said. "I bought the old Whitmore estate, the one with the greenhouse." Her eyes widened. "You're kidding." "I thought we could restore it. You always said you wanted a garden." Vienna rested her head against his chest. "You've been listening. Every word." They didn't fly off to Italy or Paris. They drove 20 minutes outside town to the house she used to dream about as a kid, the one with the cracked fountain and the overgrown ivy. Jaxon had hired local contractors to start repairs, but he insisted they do the greenhouse together. The next morning, they painted the first pane of glass side by side. Their life was quiet but full. Jaxon started consulting part-time for nonprofits and local startups. Vienna applied to a graduate program in family counseling, and when she got in, he threw a surprise dinner in the greenhouse. complete with fairy lights and a handwritten letter tucked beneath her plate. They made Sunday pancakes a ritual. They built a bench under the old maple tree where they'd said their vows. They argued about paint colors and made up with kisses and long walks through town. Vienna never once asked him to prove himself, and Jaxon never again needed to. Because in a world that once measured his worth by numbers and net value, he finally understood the only thing that mattered was waking up to a woman who saw him not for what he had but for who he chose to become. And for the rest of his life, he never stopped choosing her.